2019 might be one of the more challenging years to describe. If you want the short version, 2019 was an overall good year for the label, with the best overshadowing the worst. If you want the long version, 2019 was a year that felt like an up and down roller coaster throughout the whole year. On the one hand, you have some of the best material on Instinct and a great set of songs for Uncaged. On the other, you have the screechy, annoying Brostep and house cuts on Uncaged, and the dull, generic songs with lack of personality on Instinct. A continuation of the new change where there are some of the best songs of this era of Monstercat, while also revealing cracks in the formula, whether it came to new debuts or artists gradually getting worse, like with Vice Tone, Slushii, or Half an Orange. The transitional point between 2018 and 2020, where a large reaction is still, it's from an early era, but with a hint of what will happen once we cover 2020, where some of the bad material lingers. So with that said, onto the list. No remixes or VIPs, and only 2 songs per artist in the top 10. With that said, let's start off with our dishonorable mentions.
We got the world and everything is ours.
This is the last example of Bishu's early production choices putting me off. And while Hallie to Cali had its fair share of highlights such as Get to Know Me and Control, there are also some pretty bad singles on that EP. Way Up seems to get the most hate from the EP, and I can see why based on the generic production and lyrical bars. Diamonds is a whole other beast entirely, and it all has to do with those high-pitched vocal samples on the drops. They sound unpleasant to hear, and it doesn't help matters that the production is accommodated around them. It feels like Machine all over again, but worse. Thankfully, this would be the last year where Bishu's sound design bugged me, and in 2020 he started getting much better. I can't wait to cover that year of Bishu instead of this. If it wasn't for Stonebank's Trap Drop, this would have been in the top 10 for sure. And even then, the sounds used are repetitive and the snare sounds too clunky to have any impact. I don't mind the keyboard melodies on the post drops. Unfortunately, we're stuck with Gammer for the first half with his awful hardcore drops. The kicks not getting any punch to begin with, but what's worse are the air horn sounds spanned all over the first drop and then are left to linger for the second. It sounds like a crossover between Need You and any one of the bad movements and trap songs I've covered so far. But even with all of that, this is just standard bad from Gammer at this point. He has something much worse on this list, something I didn't expect from him given my low standards, so brace yourselves. I feel like part of the reason why 2019's worst felt more prominent was the result of new acts getting signed that didn't start with good first impressions. And unfortunately, Tony Romero was one of those acts. He would go on to create a well-liked album in 2021 called Introspection, with some influences in funk and disco. And I'll even say, he didn't have a bad 2019 either, with Saint Tropez and Heatwave being some good tracks. But Can't was a massive miss for him. It's a repetitive slog to repeat the same vocal Help It until the end of time, and contains some underwhelming warbles on the drops that only makes things worse. The only thing this song has going for it is that muted percussion line, which sounds quite nice despite all the annoying elements get in the way. Percussion that exists in other Tony Romero songs that I would rather listen to. Because pretending I like this is something I can't do. Okay, Nonsens, I get you're new around this time, but that doesn't give you the excuse of making a bad Galantis knockoff. And it's not the kind of Galantis that made songs like Runaway, You and I, or even Bones. No, this sounds like Galantis way back in their church era, excluding Bones of course, where the tropical design is at its worst and the vocal whoops and samples make things sound cheaper. With the wimpy synthetic horns, the weak piano keeps giving you nothing to dance with. Nonsens got a few passes on the label, off labels another story entirely, with Heroes, We All, and Nobody Else being some decent pop future bass songs on Instinct. So it's a bit of a whiplash to see them make songs like We All, to see them doing this. It's not bad enough to make the list proper, but it's still bad to land a spot here due to how generic and trope-filled it is for tropical house.
That's when we need each other. That's when we need each other. That's when we need
This one's here for disappointment. I stated before that the reason I never got into Note Taker was because of my first impressions of this song. Even revisiting this song for this list, I've managed to pinpoint why. Sure, Eric Lemaire's vocal performance is the song's saving grace, but it's the production from Note Taker that's the big issue. The meandering saw pads, the flat percussion don't give you the punch or aura that it usually has. It sounds like a Note Taker song stylistically, but with none of his lead design, his atmosphere is toned down significantly, and it has none of the impact that made songs like Shimmer and The Storm so good. You can argue From Dust and Ashes did this too, but at least there it was more of a relaxed vibe, whereas this is trying to sound impactful and it ends up flat. Again, not bad enough to make the list proper, but the disappointment I had with this was going to keep the song in the dishonorable mentions. Because while diversity can be a good thing for artists, there might be a few times where it might be preferred if they stick to what they were doing before. 2019 was the start of Vicetone's downfall into mediocrity, with the cheeseball that is fences, and despite Home having 11 million views, no one talks about that song. I seriously doubt people even remember that track. And while I'll stick up for Waiting, it's not good, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be. Ran Out of Reasons, on the other hand, attempts to ship Vicetone's aesthetic to future bass. And yeah, we did not need that. It's got none of the anthemic energy that made Vicetone at their best, and it's everything that makes modern Vicetone so underwhelming. The thin mix, the underwhelming snap stutter, the cheesy leads, and all the fun energy from their previous hits like Walk on Fire just becomes a husk here. In other words, I ran out of reasons to say anything else about this.
It's the ways of the underground.
These last two songs were both last cuts from the list proper, because while I still don't like them, there's at least something to latch onto. In the case of Eptic, it's been wild to see his progress nowadays compared to my bad first impressions with this and Southside with DJ Snake. And I'll admit, Flesh and Blood wasn't a terrible EP either. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was back in the day. But out of all of the Eptic singles from the EP, this one was the one I hated back in the day, and to this day it has not gotten any better. While I do like the build up with the bassline pauses and general flow, as well as the synthwave keys on the intro, it's the drops. As the screechy leads not only set my teeth on edge, they also sound really wimpy. I'm also not a fan of the vocal chop here, especially during that second half where it tries to make it more demonic and it does not stick to landing. It's at least better than Company's song of the same name and also uses the same Power Glove sample, but when Eptic has a remix of Aero, Dark Star, along with his supergroup with Space Laces and Sudden Death called Master Hand, this definitely sticks out as one of his weakest songs. If you saw my old Monstercat videos back on my channel in 2022, you probably saw this coming. I'm willing to bet you also expected to get on the list, given my thoughts on Lost and Found during that time, even if I don't consider it to be my least favorite song of 2022 anymore. Phoenix has been around since the 01 compilation, and out of all the artists on that compilation, he was able to make the best impression, at least at the time. But since Faint's style never changed, including the now outdated mixing choices, time quickly caught up to him. 2019 proved how quickly people found alternatives in the form of Mazar, and Drifters is easily the worst case on mixing alone, where the vocals are louder than the percussion, and everything around it sounds like it was recorded in a cave. Because while there are some likable elements like the electric guitar and the choppy synth on the intro, because the mixing is so bad, it nullifies any positive contributions they could have had. I know there are going to be people like this, and I could see it in a nostalgic way since it sounds a lot like Faint's older work, but at least Sauce has some spacious atmosphere and the mixing wasn't as bad as it is here. As much as I'm not a fan of that track, I'll take that over this. But with that said, on to the list proper, starting with Another reason why the worst felt more prominent compared to 2017 or 2018 was acts losing their momentum and turning bad. This leads us to a duo called Half an Orange, an indie pop act consisting of Andrew Spellman and Michael Maloof, now known as Before Sadat. Now, if you were in the community at the time, you would know Half an Orange were disliked heavily. But if you ask me, I thought Mostly We Grow Part 1 was a decent album, and at the time I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Then Part 2 came along, and it was at that point where they started slowly morphing into the Chainsmokers of the label, especially when they put out songs like this.
You protecting me, you were my sunscreen.
They're setting a light mood with some self-awareness of how cheesy the song is. There are songs that are the definition of cringe, with any light mood feeling completely, and then there's Sunscreen by Half an Orange. I can start with the production, which dips its toes into the shallow waters of beach music, combined with some really stiff tropical percussion that has no loose energy or actually makes you want to dance or relax to. Especially when the drops have this unpleasant vocal chop that sounds like a baby sea lion screaming. But that's really just scratching the surface here. And while the production is bad enough to make it on the list, as well as Andrew Spellman failing to sound chill or charismatic, was Blonde Maze too busy or something? It really is the content that makes this song deserving of this spot. It's not unfamiliar to have nostalgic references in a Half an Orange song. It's basically their brand. But with songs like Left Behind and yes, even Blink-182, there was a purpose to the references, and the writing actually got to the point. Whereas here, the entire song is a bunch of references with barely a cohesive message. Remembering riding in a 99 Honda Civic, running red lights while playing Nirvana, and yes, they really push that reference to the point where the cover art is a reference to Nirvana's Nevermind, with the message being that he'll be okay because he got his partner who protects him, and compares said partner to Sunscreen, which often feels more like a to-do list to put on, and also washes off. Oh no, why did this song get so much worse? And really, that line is a smoking gun. It makes the whole journey of the lyrics mean nothing, especially when the verse just repeats itself for the rest of the song. And when the rest of the production can't compensate, the song is less of a sunscreen and more of a sunburn. I was shocked that it didn't receive a lot of backlash for putting Tokyo Machine Spooky on a dishonorable mention spot. The funny thing about that video is that I was right about it being controversial just for the wrong reasons. I've admitted before that while Tokyo Machine is exactly my niche, I still have some respect for the guy's electro house. The reason why I didn't like Spooky was because it veered into sounds that aren't pleasant to me. But there's also a part of me that feels bad for Spooky, because as much as I don't like that song, it's not the worst he's done, and I can at least see the appeal to it. No, if you want a Tokyo Machine that really gets under my skin, you know, as much as I'm not a fan of Tokyo Machine's new rhythm pivots, with the exception of that Virtual Riot collab, which is growing on me even if I didn't enjoy it on release, and also Busted, which is more on Temnite and Boom Kitty, I will gladly take any of his new records on Monstercat nowadays over this. A collab with trap artist Yako, and this was his first song, although you can tell as his style is nowhere to be found, or at least I can't find it. So it's just a Tokyo Machine song, and it's easily the worst of his entire career. As much as I complained about Spooky's synth design, although I might need to update that list now that I remember how bad Hype was, at least there was some bombast and a decent Halloween atmosphere. To give some credit, the chiptune plucks towards the intro and pre-drops, they aren't bad. But as soon as those vocal samples of "I Just Want the Bad Boys" show up, the song plummets. The original Bad Boys song sample in particular is also used on a Reaper track called Rave Punk, and not only is that song better, the sample also works better than in here. When this song uses it, it just pulls me out every time. All of it leads to a series of drops that are so poorly executed because of the sound design. The annoying chiptune screech as the main sound, the horrible stutter effects that happen right as the snare shows up, the in-your-face bass, to a trap drop that tries to pitch down the leads to add some type of darkness, along with some annoying Pac-Man samples that makes the drop worse to listen to. It's not executed well at all. It's not fun, it's rather empty for a Tokyo Machine track, especially around this era when he was getting better, and as I said, it's the worst song from Tokyo Machine. Now get in the kennel. If you remember my video on the best Monstercat songs of 2025, I put Reverie by Haywire and Braken at the number 10 slot. It's a great song overall with Haywire's iconic melodies, and although I wasn't wowed by the drops, they were still good enough to leave an impression. I also remember referencing a specific song of Braken's that I said was his last release before Reverie. And while I can rest easy knowing that this wasn't his last song on label, doesn't make it any less disappointing. Now, truth be told, Braken never had that many releases outside of Tristram collabs, and I definitely think that Tristram was the reason why so many of those songs like Flight or Frame of Mind were as good as they were. Even with songs like To the Stars, which is now 13 years old if you can believe it, I still had some hope that this might be decent. I don't know, I was expecting something better than this, which has some okay leads, but everything else surrounding the track, well, there is nothing else, besides a mediocre bass synth and some faint synth accents. That also translates to the drops as well, with some of the most underwhelming vocal synths I've ever heard coming from Instinct. This has the feeling of Alan Walker house, and even by those standards, it's still bad, because older Alan Walker hits like Faded or Sing Me to Sleep had some memorable melodies and a drive to it. Even adjacent tracks like Link by Jim Yosef or New Beginning by SK Hall. Wherever I Go doesn't have any of that. It's too bombastic to set a more relaxed tone, yet not enough to have an impact or drive that makes at least those songs work. There isn't a single thing I can latch onto where someone might think that this was one of their favorite songs on the label. It has the feeling of a demo track that got pulled too early before any sort of potential could have been finished. And when Reverie is right there is no reason to come back to this. I said this numerous times already, but first impressions, they're everything. And I feel a little bit bad knowing that this song was my first impression of this guy, and since I haven't checked out his other stuff, it's possible it could be another note-taker situation where I check out his other stuff and I get why he's so loved, but I couldn't stand this song when I listened to it back then, and it hasn't gotten any better from revisiting said song. And since Cringe is an exclusive to Half an Orange, well, I can say this, unlike Wherever I Go, I could see why this one might be adored by few, namely that pitched up vocal sample that sounds like the turrets from the Portal series. It fits the vibe of the song, which is cute, robot, anime core. Well, I gave that a try. And this at least seems to be self-aware of its ridiculous nature, at least partially. The whole concept of the song is all the things this robot person is doing without their partner. Just replace the words you with true. As cringy as that is, it was always going to be how it was delivered with the vocals and the production, and neither are good. Sure, it fits the vibe, but not only does the robot vocal get annoying with the word chew repeated until the end of time, it also has this weird teeny mixing that doesn't sound great. It's also shoved to the very front of the mix, and just like the turrets from the Portal games, literally murders the rest of the production. Outside of the vocal, you can barely make out the rest of the elements outside of a tinny snap. There's a guitar somewhere in the song, some synth keys, but not only does it sound bland, just like Wherever I Go, it gets buried by that pitched up vocal. But the worst part about this song, it's the pacing. For a song that's around 3 minutes and 30 seconds, this has the length of Cookie from Space by Infected Mushroom. And to add to that, 7 Minutes Dead self-released a slowed down version of this song called Vibin' Without You, which is even longer and slower. The one element that stands out gets annoying after a while, and the rest of the song is so underwhelming and boring that it's not worth mentioning. Let's just move on. One of the more engaging aspects of the label around this time, and it's actually making a comeback recently, it's certain artists who are on a specific sub-label crossing over to another one. But when acts typically do this, especially when they're more predominant on one sub-label, it can lead to curiosity since you don't know what to expect. It can even lead to some great songs like Densai by Mazel, Millennia by Pixel Terror, and Gold by Coven. But there are times where it might be better if certain artists stick to a certain sub-label. Slumberjack, for example, are better on Uncaged, and someone like Nonsens, even though they're a mixed bag, they should stick to Instinct since their heavier material is really bad. Examine the following. In comparison to something like Bright Lights off of Yellow Claw's label Barong Family, this is definitely not as bad as that song. But this feels like the pinnacle of everything wrong with heavy nonsense. A hollow texture, lack of significant body, and sound design that gets on my nerves. Particularly that synth screech that sounds like a metal pipe being scraped. It's an awkward experience where outside of that main sound and some equally hollow percussion, there's nothing else till the drops. If anything, Nonsens' heavier work reminds me of Quix's modern work, and given my thoughts on him last year, that's not a good thing. There's also the fact that the vocal sample of Let the Beat Go became something of a meme, with Ranker showing some beat fruits, and I'm sorry, I just don't get the joke. It's not that funny. At least with Power, or even So Good by Good Times Ahead, the humor came from the overtop delivery. The joke here is just that a musical beat also sounds like a fruit beat, and the delivery of the line isn't very comedic to begin with. Say what you want about Nonsens on Instinct, with their pop feature based roots, even if I argue songs like Better are overhated, at least it's better than this. I've said before how this year, Half and Orange were slowly morphing into the Chainsmokers of Monstercat, with Mostly We Grow Part 2. Most of it is because of the bizarre lyrical content that would later consume Half and Orange in 2020. Just like the Chainsmokers' failed attempts at relatability and lyrical content on Memories Do Not Open. And while Sunscreen's a good example of that, this is the epitome of that idea. This pick shouldn't be surprising. It's considered the duo's worst song by many people, even if there are close contenders on Mostly We Grow Part 3. And enough with the teasing. Of course it's video games. I guess I'll start off with the writing. More importantly, what is this song even aiming for? It seems to be some commentary on video games as a hobby and how people might view gamers, with the people represented as saying he can't spend his money on his deadbeat friends, he needs to get a job, with Andrew Spellman saying maybe I fit in if I tried a little more just to act like them. And that's it. That's all the content we get. It essentially ends on a non-answer. If it's towards gamers, it's hitting the bottom of the barrel where the closest message I get is that you can be a gamer and also fit in with the rest of the adults. For all the game-related topics you can cover, you chose that? One of the most basic messages that everyone understands nowadays, and even in 2019. And with little to no detail about the journey, it's basically a giant nothing burger. What's worse is that the production doesn't have the video game appeal at all. No chiptune sounds, no energy. It's just a boring tropical pop song with sounds that feel cheap. The flute that feels more like a synth, the guitars you can barely hear, the vocal chops that meander about, and the worst, most stiff percussion I have heard from this duo, with the thump killing any sense of a relaxed feeling that this could have had. It's Half and Orange's worst song without question, and while Sunscreen was the start of that downward trend for this duo, this song cemented it. In the Boat community, this is considered to be the most hated song from this artist. And yeah, when I first heard it, I hated it too. A song that feels out of left field for this artist to make in the worst way imaginable. In other words, Gammer, this is not how you bring Brostep back. We went from copying the formula of Keizo's style of hardcore music to copying the formula of Skrillex's old Brostep hits with Gammer's screechy design from past hits like Need You and Stay Tonight. I could see someone like Virtual Riot or even Barely Alive making a song like this now. In fact, Barely Alive actually did make a song like this. And bringing Brostep back, it's a simple enough premise. The concept isn't terrible, but since we're dealing with dubstep Gammer, the execution is not good at all. I get the song is trying to call back to old Skrillex hits, but I hear so much of this song and can't help but hear a much worse version of First of the Year Equinox. The vocal chops that aren't as memorable or dynamic, the fake trap horns instead of the dark synth growls, but all of that's nothing in comparison to the drop. Equinox's drop was screechy, sure, but at least that it was somewhat restrained, and it followed nicely with the rolling drums and synth growls. Brostep strikes back as a lead for sure, but the screechy elements are pushed so close to the front that it's grating to listen to. And that's the one thing carrying the drops. And no, the screechiness does not go away when it's pitched down. The one element I can praise on this track is that guitar breakdown, and even then it highlights the big issue that even Skrillex had back in the day, wasting pretty good elements for a song with horrible drops. I wouldn't call this Gammer's worst song when Needed You is right there, but it's up there, and it represents why I never liked this artist's older dubstep work on the label. And coming back to the topic of artists wearing out their welcome, let's turn to Slushii. He's been on this list before in 2017, but Love You Need You was the only song I really didn't like from him at the time. I'd even say in early 2019, I was still on board, since Dreaming of You and Far Away, they were good singles. But he would later embarrass himself in the 2020s with the Extinction Level event, before making a minor comeback in 2024. I'd argue late 2019 is where that shift started with the Watch Your Back EP. The self-titled track was one of the last cuts off the list, as was I Do Anything. And the only song that was remotely tolerable was Test Me with Dion Timmer, a song I don't even like. And yet for this song, I can't entirely blame him on this one. I don't know if that's just me, but Slushii, just like with Nonsens, is better going off melodic, like with Far Away, or more recently, Begin Again, because every time he tries to go heavy, it does not go well. It's why Extinction Level Event was as bad as it was, and why this is easily the worst song off of Watch Your Back. With Sky XXX doing a Smoke Perp impression, definitely not one of the better rap acts to imitate, amongst some sparse, clanky percussion and Jungle Terror influences that barely add anything. It doesn't help matters when Sky XX flubs so many rhymes, like rhyming rich with jiffy and wicked with wiki. And Slushii's beyond repetitive Brim section doesn't help either, since it doesn't have the menace to make this flex song work. Kinda sounds like he was going for the bare minimum. It says beyond the goopy bass that's endlessly repeated, as well as a few vocal samples from Slushii, there's not much else going on. But the main culprit behind the quality is Carbon. He's a dubstep trap act who I don't view highly because of his thin mixes and annoying sounds. Are You Ready and Bass Bump are testaments of that, and this is no exception here, as his screechy weedy sustain is put into the front of the vast majority of the drops, and it puts me off every time. And yeah, this presence is likely why the song feels so empty, since Slushii has to find a way to blend his style with Carbon's. And to this day, it remains one of Slushii's worst songs, even with Extinction Level Event. I've heard people predict that this would top the list. And while I nearly came close, there is one more song that I hate more than this, surprisingly enough. Still, this is absolute garbage, an absolute outlier from the rest of this list, and I wouldn't blame people if they put this at the very top of the list, because it came very close. This is the last time I'm talking about Aero Chord, and while it's only natural that the very worst deserves the top, at a certain point, the more I keep bringing him up, the more he's just going to remain relevant. After this video, unless if I need to, I'm done talking about this guy. So let's talk about this train wreck of a song, shall we? Just like Player Part, this was a song that was hated even before the allegations, and has only gotten worse because of them. With this song being the most blatantly disgusting in its lyrical content given hindsight. All about the main protagonist being portrayed by a checked out Neve, can't exactly blame her, about how seduced she is by this partner, that she tells him to get his body on her body, and that she's gotten in her zone till he takes her home. Just gross. But even with that, Take Me Home is such an unlikable movement to track from start to finish. As I said before, Neve sounds too bored and disinterested on vocals, and the verse production has some distant tropical sounds that exist just to take up space. But the real horrible part are the drops ripping For You to pieces, throwing it through a sanitized commercialization machine, and thinking this much worse version is somehow decent. How amazing that Aero Chord could take one of his more liked songs, even to this day, with all the bland movement to percussion, the slower tempo which kills any groove, as well as the lead shoved to the front where it swamps out the entire production and sounds irritating. Just listen to For You at this point, there's no reason for you to go back to this, especially now. While I think most people have torn this to shreds, I think I'll go one step further. The Julius Drasig remix of For You is better than this. Yeah, I went there. So here's an update. After finishing up this series, I plan to do a video regarding my favorite Monstercat songs of all time. I started adding songs to the list already, and I'm interested to see how I take this approach, since there might be 50 or even 100 songs, not even including the honorable mentions. But while I plan on doing the best of all time, I don't want to make a worst of all time, unless if people really want me to. The main reason why is to avoid talking about this song and this artist again, because it's between this and Player Part for the worst Monstercat song of all time for me. A song that makes me feel uneasy whenever I hear it again. Most people have probably already forgotten this track since it has the lowest view count on Spotify, and people look for other songs from the EP, but I'm starting to think that might be for a good reason. And thus... the moment I heard this song, I knew I had made a mistake and I would have been better off if I hadn't bothered. Because not like I had to, Take Me Home was the easy choice, but curiosity got the best of me. And in preparation for this series, I listened to this. For one, I can't stand this production. I get what it's trying to go for with this depressing dystopian mood, and that can actually work given the production can back it up. The song that comes to mind that does this well is All Your Lives by Kaiwachi and Lexi Norton. And to give some credit, the bass line is at least decent, it has some punch to it. And the violins are fine on the verses, but the clunky snare that's rather thin, the awkward tribal vocals that have a stiff flow, and the unnecessary sharp synth pads, and the added block of percussion on the second drop, it's less depressing and more awkward to listen to, especially given the slow tempo and rather empty nature of the song. But then there's the content. And on the surface level, it's about someone being betrayed by their partner. They are able to put out fire, but in the end, the person in question is still left burning. A large issue is that the content is way too broad and unspecific to help sell the heartache, and often it will only reach out to those who have similar cases to this one. Or I would say that if this were made by anyone else, but if you look at the lyrics a little bit and connect it to the allegations, the song's content becomes way more revealing. Like on the first verse, how it's begging for someone to take back something they said. What's said is never specified, but you know, they said something. Or how they were everything to them and now all of a sudden they mean nothing to them. And that's when the ugly side of the song really comes through. Because despite Bianca co-writing this, she's the best part of this song by far, I can't help but get the feeling that this is Aero Chord trying to rewrite history and frame himself as the victim. I get it. Take Me Home has much worse production and it is the worst song, but the content of that song is so jarring that it would make any normal person jolt back in disgust. This is more subtle about it, and that makes it so much worse. Because unless if you know what Aero Chord did, I can see someone connecting to this, even if I get the feeling that there's more sinister intentions behind this. It's the worst Monstercat song of 2019 for that reason. And how ironic, given that this was technically the last single he ever released, since it's the last single off his last EP. Because he was burning, and still is. And you're not getting any sympathy from me. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, really appreciate it. I finally do not get to talk about Aero Chord ever again, so that's definitely a good thing. Best list will be coming out in a few days, so be on the lookout for that. But until then, I will see you all soon.